Thank you everybody for joining. Welcome again to Coaching from the Soul. This is our seventh get together, so really excited to be here. We are going to kick off today with John, who's going to introduce our topic, and then we will have a discussion from there. So thank you, John.
Thank you, Graham. Yes, our topic for this evening has been inspired by a walk in nature and looking at the trees, particularly in this part of the world, in the UK and Ireland. And the chestnut trees, the leaves are starting to turn, the yellows, the golds, the browns. The green is beginning to disappear. And when I looked at the leaves and I thought, yeah, it's beautiful, but they're starting their slow process to being shed from the trees. They're starting their slow process of turning into a beautiful image, but they will fall, as the Americans talk about the fall. They will fall and they will die, and we will go into the winter where it appears that the trees are no longer actively living anyway. And all that is necessary to experience the rebirth that happens in spring, the rebirth of new life. And it got me thinking about the cycle of life and the cycle of nature, and this cycle of life and abundance, and then death, and then rebirth. And I wondered about what are some of the things that I have noticed that I have died to? What are some of the things that used to be in my life that thankfully they're now gone, and I've gone through a period of growth as a result of that death? And I'm thinking about, for example, how I might view business. So I've been in business for over 40 years. And in the early years, maybe even for the first 20 of those years, it would have been defined by competition and conflict and drive and winning. And latterly, it's more defined by less about the conflict and more about the collaboration, more about the connection. Not necessarily compromise, but definitely about connection and collaboration. So I can see that my thinking about how business gets done has changed. It's gone. And thankfully, some of the other things that I've seen, my judgmental nature about people who are different to me, that's something that has gone. That's something that has died and has been replaced by a more gentle approach. In coaching terms, or Carl Rogers' language, we might call it unconditional positive regard. So that has replaced my judgmental approach, and I'm thankful for that. But when I look at what has been replaced and what has died, and we talked in a number of our previous talks about the nature of thought, and sometimes it's easy to see that, oh, that's just thought, and let the thought pass. But whenever a thought has hung around and has become very, very familiar, it embeds into a belief. And it's hard sometimes to see that it can just as easily be shed as a thought, because that's all it is. It's just a thought that has hung around for a long time. It's a thought that we have become familiar with. I think some of us talk about sticky thoughts or ninja thoughts, sneaky thoughts. So it is. They're still thoughts, but they have guided my life in the early part of my life, but don't serve me well anymore. And I was reminded when I was doing some work with a client, and they were talking about how they sell and how they deal with some of their major customers, particularly large retailers in this part of the world and in all parts of the world, who are organized and they have their rules and they have, this is the way it's done. And I was suggesting different ways of trying it. And this lady said, no, that's the way it is with those people. And it just, a thought struck me, well, everything is the way it is until it isn't. And what is it that stops something from being the way it is? And in my world, it's a change of thought. It's a change in the paradigm. It's a change in how we look at things. If we look at something that, well, that's the way it is and it can't be changed, well, then we wouldn't have change. Somebody reminded me today, actually, in a board meeting about a saying that they picked up: to improve is to change, to become perfect is to change often. And I think it was Cardinal Henry Newman who might have said that back in the day. So growth and development and rebirth involves change. And it might not be as dramatic as the death of winter, but it is a shedding. It is a shedding of beliefs, of thoughts, of things that may have served us well, but don't serve us well anymore. And I think it's marvelous that that's how it operates, and that these cycles, they can be long, like nature, or they can be even longer, like evolution, or they can be short terms of we have order in our lives, and then there's a disorder as the shedding and the dying happens, and then there's a reordering. And it doesn't mean that we lose everything of the past, but we reorder it. And this is a cycle, and it's a cycle that I had noticed. So I'd like to hear what that sparks in you guys and in others, this whole concept of life and death and rebirth, or order, disorder, and reorder. So over to whoever wants to jump in.
Thanks, John. That gave me some thoughts, so let me add that, and then yeah, happy to hear from anyone else. Feel free to jump in or just pop in the chat, and if you kind of have some thoughts to go next. But yeah, I think what was interesting for me is I had a day last week where I'd been thinking about some topics that had been stuck going round and round in my head for a long while. And so somebody suggested to me, a coach actually, that I kind of give myself the space. And so I went to a kind of local park with a huge lake, and I've been there before, and it's a great kind of picturesque place to be. And as I started walking around, I noticed the same old thoughts kept coming back. And what was interesting to me was, because I was deliberately kind of taking it a bit slower, I noticed them. And what happened is I'd be like, no, not today. No, not today. No, this is my time for just having a bit of a chill. And what occurred to me kind of after, I guess, an hour or so of that was how peaceful that had become, but also, oh, actually, how easy that was once I didn't get caught up in the story, and once I did just notice my thinking. And so I actually wrote down, okay, wouldn't it be great to not have those negative thoughts? And then I was reminded, hang on, those are not negative, I'm making them negative. So I think that was quite interesting to see as well. And what came up for me was this idea that, okay, well, when I don't have that thinking, I know what to do next. I get into flow. I was actually thinking on that day, like, what would thriving be like? That was my question that was coming up. Like, what I was pondering, what's thriving? And I got as far as, well, being in the flow without that thinking stopping me. Which I think would be great. I'd love to get that to another level of thriving, but it made me think, actually, yeah, this is pretty cool even there, to be making progress, to know what to do, to be in flow. And each time I see some thinking that's familiar, to your point, that it's been around for a long while, it's not particularly helpful, we'll just go, okay, not now. And yeah, that in itself was, yeah, I came away from that day going, right, this is what I'm going to do next. And yeah, back into that flow again. What does that bring up for anyone else?
Yeah, Graham, I'm happy to jump in. Um, and I think just hearing you speak then and John's introduction kind of brought up for me a couple of metaphors which I found really useful and have helped me, I suppose, shed some thoughts that I've had before that were um really sticky thoughts and kind of hung around. They were part of kind of that main infrastructure, I suppose, of thinking that I had that I almost didn't realize was thinking. Um, and one of that, in the same way, John, that you were talking about how the seasons come and go, um, it made me think about how the weather comes and goes. And the metaphor being us as the sky, and the clouds are what happens, what comes and goes. The weather is what happens, maybe our thoughts, our thinking. Um, and the sky knows that's just what is. The sky never has to try and change the thunder or try and fix the rain or stop it from raining, because the sky is so vast that like the rain doesn't impact it. The sky is still the sky. Um, and actually, kind of a step further than that, the rain and the thunder and the sun, like, is all necessary, is like all a part of the sky and all necessary to things thriving. Um, and I love that reminder sometimes to myself to be like, if I'm feeling in a way that I don't want to be feeling, knowing actually like that feeling is just what is at the moment. I don't need to fix it. I don't need to change it. I don't need to stop it. I don't need to try and make it into something else. It is just what is. And as soon as I kind of remind myself of that, and I'm okay with what is and what I'm feeling, often the thing that I thought I didn't want to be feeling kind of fades away pretty quickly. Um, yeah, so it brought, as John, you were speaking, it brought kind of that metaphor to mind, which was lovely. Thank you. Um, and a second thing it reminded me of, which I think has been useful for me on this kind of journey of learning more about three principles, more about the understanding, is around sometimes, because so much of this stuff is just what is, it's truth with a capital T, and often it's so simple. It's so easy for me to like get annoyed about, oh, well, why didn't I see that sooner? Or like, why is it taking me so long to get this? Or everyone else is, feeling calm and chill and zen today, and why am I feeling agitated and stressed? And it was actually when we were all doing a training together, actually in London, and I had about a 50-minute walk in from where I was staying. And I think it was about the second morning I was walking in, and I noticed different things on my route in through London that I'd not seen before. And like it occurred to me how like obviously normal that is. We can walk the same path and sometimes we'll look up and see something different, or we'll look down a street that we passed that we didn't look at the day before, or something else catches our attention. And that's just what happens, and that's so normal. Yet if I'm walking the journey of learning more about this, if I don't see things the first time, it's my fault. I'm doing something wrong. I'm listening wrong. I'm not getting it. And I love the idea of, oh no, I just walked down the street once and I heard what I heard then. And then I walked down the street the next day and I saw something different, in exactly the same way as, I don't walk along the street and spot new things and go, oh, well, I didn't walk down this street right yesterday. I didn't see it all. Like, like you can't walk down a street wrong. In the same way, we can't kind of like walk through this life wrong. Um, and yeah, you both talking about kind of walking walks really brought that up for me. Because I think that's the thought I would like to shed more around, the idea of how things should be, how my life should look like to me, or my expectations around that. And just knowing that no, what is. Um, and there doesn't have to be anything more than that. Um, Yeah. So yeah, thank you for stirring those thoughts in me again. They were nice to remember.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, you can't walk down the street wrong. I love that. And yeah, it just points to the moment. I think for me, like what I notice is like, be it walking or whatever else, like the moment I'm distracted from my thinking, oh, suddenly it's gone. Like as you were saying about the weather, or even yeah, walking down the street, like the moment I'm doing something else, which I think is why walking works in for me, like I'm like, oh, I've noticed something else, right? It's gone. Um, but the power in that, I think, like this, like John, you said at the start, like everything is the way it is till it isn't. Well, that thinking stays around until we stop thinking it. And yeah, but if that thinking's stopping us from doing something, then it is just that kind of one step away from it going and being able to move on to something else. I like that. Anyone else? What's coming up for people?
Graham, I'm going to jump in again and just share something silly, if I may. Because you speaking then, there was, and this is very silly, but it makes me smile. So a few months ago in the UK, there was something hit the news about a barrister who was online virtually for her court case, and they came to speak to her and she'd fallen asleep at home behind the camera, and it made the news, and her reason that she fell asleep was that she'd had a jacket potato for lunch and it had made her tired. And the following day I was listening to the radio and they asked the very silly question of when was the last time a potato got you in trouble? Which is just a ridiculous question. But then it occurred to me, however funny I thought that question was, the idea of when was the last time our thoughts got us in trouble or stopped us from doing something or limited us or restricted us, it occurred to me that for me, that happens all the time. But actually, the question of when was the last time your thoughts got you in trouble should be an even sillier question than when was the last time a potato got you in trouble, because at least a potato is a thing in reality. And I thought thoughts aren't even a thing. They're just kind of made up. They're in my head. They're nothing of substance. I don't have to believe them. So I love the idea of laughing at the idea of when was the last time a potato got me in trouble, versus actually what is even more ridiculous is when was the last time my kind of formless, imaginary, made up thoughts got me in trouble. And yet how often they do. So yeah, I feel like I need to go on a balance of life of making sure potatoes get me in more trouble than my thoughts do.
I love that. Yeah,
Mm.
I'm gonna put a picture of a potato on the wall. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. See what comes up for anyone else. Go on, Noki.
Everyone's quiet today.
Oh,
John's got us contemplating here his wisdom. Um, outside my window here is pine trees, and yeah, John mentioned trees and them shedding. And having lived in this place for 15 years, I never realized. I mean, I realize now, but pine trees shed their pines twice a year, unlike deciduous trees, which shed them once a year. But the pine trees actually never ever turn brown. They remain green. It's just that that season, the spring season of pine needles falls, but simultaneously the green ones are already there. And so I'm just waiting a week or two or a few weeks, the pine trees will do the same thing and cover our backyard with all the needles. But what struck me, what John was talking about was shedding what we no longer need. And he talked about beliefs and thoughts. And it struck me that, no, the world runs on belief systems. We run on belief systems. And the root of belief is a lie. Be lie. It's not be truth, it's be lie. So what is a belief? Beliefs are, at least to me, I mean, maybe there's more to this than that, but this is what coming up at this moment. A belief is basically a thought or thoughts repetitively repeated to oneself. And a belief becomes more powerful when more people believe in that thought. And so over time, our belief systems have changed because those beliefs, we no longer believe in those beliefs because they no longer serve us. Just look at our spiritual and religious history. At some point, the religions lost their power because people stopped believing in whatever was being believed in. And so if I were to look at myself, it's like, what do I believe in? What are all the beliefs I've had over the years? And where did those beliefs come from? And why did I believe them? Interestingly, most beliefs are become ingrained to the point because it's repeated over and over again to ourselves, by our family, by society. And because they're so ingrained, they seem to be a truth. They seem to be true. But if we do kind of a technique of like, well, let's just pull at a string here. Is this true or not? Like if I kind of start questioning this belief, will it stand the test of me questioning it? Because if it's the truth, then it will withstand any questioning of it. It would just be true. And most beliefs are just that. They're just a belief, and they start to unravel once I question it. And how does that happen when I become aware that, oh, it's just a thought that I had, and I kept saying that to myself? I don't know what that is. Let's see, I should be super competitive, and that's how I will kind of be successful in the world. And that's because everyone else has told me that's the way you're going to be successful. You just gotta, blah, blah, blah. So we can fill in whatever, right? The thing is that beliefs are extremely difficult to change. Right? It's because there's so much, personally, it's because I have an investment in that belief that it's true and I'm right. So, and then I got to prove to someone else I'm right because I really believe in that belief is the way I should operate in the world. And that's how I'm going to, I don't know, make my mark or whatever it is. So what if the world can just be a lot of fun? Why does it have to be so competitive? Why do we need to kind of, why can't we have a world where it's win-win? Where everyone is, whatever's happening is a benefit to everyone. It's not just a few of us. What would happen if more of us had that belief? Even if it's a belief that's not, still a belief, but it's just a bunch of what ifs. It's what if I change my thought of what is possible. And then more people will have the same thought. And what is a belief really? In the end, is a whole bunch of people coming together and saying, yeah, I agree with you. Let's do that. So there's a whole bunch of us agreeing that, we should kill each other in Ukraine and Israel and whatever. I don't really agree with that. So, but maybe we need more people to say, hey, we're done with that. We can move on now. We're human beings. I think we've evolved to the point that we can have brotherly love and sisterly love, and we can extend our hands out to each other and say, you know, I think that's built the world more than wars have. Every war I've seen has kind of been destructive. I don't, that's not a belief, that's the truth. But every time a person extends a hand, that's a gesture of compassion. And so here's a belief that I've had. It's like, you know, it's like, I don't know if it's a belief, it's like compassion. Why isn't there more compassion in the world? I looked at it and I said, well, how much compassion do I have for myself? How many times have I beat myself up over what? A thought. What thought? I'm not good enough. That's usually one of them, right? I'm not good enough. Someone's better than me. Well, none of that's true. So let's start with, I said to myself, maybe I should just start with some compassion for myself. And then the compassion will be shown in the world because it'll be reflected back to me because I've started to have compassion for myself. And when I have compassion for myself, then I can see a street person say, hey, yeah, I feel you, man. Here's a few dollars. Or more importantly, maybe I'll sit there and say, have a chat with that guy and say, I know how you got here, but man, I'll give you an ear today. Yeah, that's what I have to say for now. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Noti. I love the idea that, yeah, it's a great spot, isn't it? How often are we not extending the compassion to ourselves? And actually, if we do, how much that then overflows. Like, I think it's almost infectious. Like, yeah. Edwin, what's coming up for you today? See you pondering there.
You know, so from the moment you guys introduced the theme, what really pops was something that I went through, and kind of a personal story, but that's not the gist of what I really want to share. But I'll begin with that. For years, I kind of held this belief that many of you might be familiar with, you know, that I'm only as good as my achievements. And this belief drove me to constantly strive for perfection, you know, and to seek validation through external success, and even to measure my own self-worth by the standards set by others. And if you would have met me back then, on the surface, it seemed like, you know, a harmless way of thinking that at times even felt that I was motivating myself and motivating that belief. And after that, after all, it was just the thought of wanting to be successful and comparing myself and measuring myself to whatever I've achieved at that moment that will validate how I felt about myself. And as I live with that belief, I started to notice patterns that the more I achieved, the more hollow my success or victories felt. And very soon, you know, whatever achievement I would get, it would just provide this very temporary relief, and soon would be replaced by, you know, the anxiety of another goal or something else. And inevitably, and I can remember vividly, the fear of failure loomed quite real all the time. And the pressure was constantly to perform better. And I lived in that kind of cycle, and it was exhausting. And then I remember 2016, the first time I came across a talk about the inside out understanding. And somebody, the person facilitating that was a workshop, asked a question, and the question was to consider the possibility that our thoughts, not our circumstances, were creating our experience of life. And for whatever reason, I heard it, but it sank so deeply. It was like this new radical idea, and one that kind of challenged everything that I believed up to that point. And, you know, when I sat with that perspective, something incredible happened to me. And I think that for the first time I realized that my belief in the need to achieve, to be worthy, was nothing more than the thought. And a different, newer perspective kind of revealed itself. But what I really want to share is that as I look back, I can quite honestly tell you the steps that I went through, at least to me, from shading that belief. I recognize the thought-feeling connection. That what I was feeling, it was my thinking, it was the thought. And I questioned the validity of that belief. And as I did that, I felt myself embracing new thoughts. And these new thoughts allow me to live and to experience life from a place of inner peace. And I think with this new circumstance, I began to really to experience life from that place, rather than the pressure that I was putting myself on it. And that has had a tremendous impact on relationships, my creativity, and even, and I would say this, a sustainability of what I consider success now. And the same process that I went through, because somebody has mentioned, you know, that those beliefs that are so real that, or those thoughts, those habitual thinking is so real that it becomes that belief, and we believe it, so because we believe it, we won't let go. But that showed me that I can't let go of them if I'm no longer wanting to continue to live the way that I was living before, because I discovered that there's a better way to experience life. So that's what comes to me. So I appreciate you setting that up for me. Check is in the mail.
Thanks, Edwin. Yeah, I love that idea of, yeah, there's peace at the end of that, isn't there? Because it's not the circumstances, it's how we're thinking about the circumstances. That's the key. Jen, how about you? I saw you come off.
Yeah, I've been sat basking in the feeling as you were all sharing such your own versions of how you hear that wisdom. And Edwin, as you were mentioning there about experiencing life, I was going, oh, that experience of when I've shed thinking, going back to how John described it at the start, there have been times where it's been very conscious that I've gone, oh, you mean I don't have to think that? I don't have to keep grasping onto that. I can let that go. And there's been times where I've had experience where, you know, I've been really, something else has seemed more important to focus on. And it's not, you know, not that time for thinking about that. Go away, come back another time. And then there's been other occasions when I've just known by the feeling that I've shed something, but I couldn't have told you in that moment what it was. And it seemed at times where it's really important that I must work out what it was that I've let go of. And as I'm sat here thinking now, so, you know, that seems really tiring. I don't think I've got the energy to do that. It seems I can just let that go and not have to work out what it is I've let go. So that question of what it is that you can shed, I don't need to know what it is. That can go, and that gentleness and kindness and compassion that I associate so much with that space behind all that thinking, that can take care of that. My intellect doesn't need to work it out. It does enough of thinking. It doesn't need to do all that. Add another thing onto the list of having to work out what it is I have to stop thinking about and create a whole load of thinking around not thinking. So that's what's been occurring to me. That gentleness of and simplicity about how I've not got to work it out.
I love that. Thank you. Yeah, it always comes back to it being really simple, doesn't it? Simple when we see it, I think, back to the noticing. I'm just wondering, Dennis, if there was anything you wanted to say or ask. And then maybe we'll go across after to John to close us out with kind of what you got from it as you started us off. But yeah, what's coming up for you, Dennis?
Well, thank you. First of all, if you see me make a mad dash, it's just started to rain. So
Okay.
if you see me moving, it's because I'm trying to get my device out of the rain. So I'll hold out here as long as I can. There's a couple of topics that you touched upon, that kind of stood out to me. There was this, I think about perfection that kind of rose up to me, and I had this thought. I was my degree is in theater, speech, and communication, and I've had my fair bit of time as an actor on stage, but my real focus when I was in university was set design. And one of the things that occurred to me when we were talking about perfection is how much the audience, the further they are away from the set, the more perfect it is. But if you're one of those who are building the set, constructing the set, the closer you are to it, the more imperfections exist on that stage. So that image came to me because I've been able to design and paint and cuss myself out for some really poor work. And that was my own view. But then the concept of perfection also called to mind it's kind of a game I've played with myself, and it's a end of life game. And it wasn't something I started out really trying to do. It just kind of started to occur to me. And I was thinking about when my wife, we've been together for a little over 20 years now. When we first met, one of the most perfect moments in my life was I took her to see the musical Jekyll and Hyde, and she was sitting beside me, and I turned and enthralled the what was happening on stage, and it occurred. If death had came and tapped me I would have said, okay, because I just lived a perfect moment. I just had a perfect moment.
You're fading off there, Dennis.
Spend a lot of time. This is Wednesday, and first Wednesday of the month, they play the air raid sirens.
Ah,
And so those just went off. So I apologize. Plus, my internet has not been fun. So I'll try to get through this. So on top of that game, it dawned on me that there was other moments that I would say were perfect. If Death had tapped me on the shoulder and said, time to go, I would have said, yeah, okay, good. Yeah. And that was those times when my children, when they were first born, they were toddlers and they were on the floor. And I would climb down on the floor with them and experience life and just kind of get messy with them and enjoy having them, you know, grab a finger in their mouth or grab a hold of a hand or something like that. And just how perfect of a moment those are. And then here in my wisdom at 62, going on 63, I decided this year for the first time in my life to get puppies. Don't trust my wisdom on everything, okay? And and so I now have two Pomsky puppies. They're now 6 months old, but I realized with them, I'm experiencing that same perfection, where as long as I get down into their world, as long as I climb down onto the ground with them, as long as I accept one of them coming up and nuzzling in their mouth my nose, then I'm in a state of perfection. And it occurred to me that one of the variables in that perfection had to be messy. There had to be something really, really messy going on too, to make a really perfect moment. And so that's kind of where my head went on perfection. Now, the other one that really stood out to me, and I'll try to be quick because I know we're at one actually by my watch, is the potato. The potato. I've just finished a book today by Brian Tyler Cohen, American author, YouTube influencer, and it's his first book. It went #1, and it's called Shameless. And he's a liberal and progressive, and he's talking about the American Republican Party and how it's really not set in its way that it used to be. But his last story at the end of it was about how during World War II, the Jewish prisoners in the concentration camps got an idea that the best way to affect the war would be to starve the Nazis. And they devised a plan, because these prisoners were involved in packing potatoes that would go off and be used by the Nazis. And so they got a plan where they would steal bits of barbed wire, and as they were packing the potatoes, they would poke holes in the potatoes so that in hopes the potatoes would rot by the time it got to the people who were going to eat it, and hopefully starve them now. Yeah, it didn't work, but it was a great idea. But the author of Shameless said, I'm going to do my best to poke holes in the potatoes of the extremist Republicans. And I have to wonder, as a metaphor, if maybe our own potatoes that we're poking holes in are our beliefs. And that. Anyway, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you.
Yeah. You're talking about the conditions of your perfect moments when death could tap you on the shoulder and they're messy. I think to take something that Jen said, what's also happening in those is that the space behind the thinking that we normally have has taken over and taken care of those situations as well. And I think it's an important part. And while we might shed our leaves, what I have discovered is whenever the regrowth happens in the spring, it doesn't always mean that the stuff that we have shed doesn't come back. And Edwin reminded me of it there in terms of having compassion. I was doing a meditation about unconditional love and being loved unconditionally by a higher power. And for 5 seconds, I felt it. And it was wonderful. And it lasted all of 5 seconds. And it was so powerful that I remember it was just about 5 seconds. And then some of the leaves that I thought I had shed for good came back and said, who are you to be unconditionally loved? What about the time that you, and bang, off it went again. But at least I know that there is that space behind the thinking. I know it's there, and I felt it very recently for 5 seconds. So, and it's enough to keep me going for another 5 years, I hope. Thanks, everyone. You want to close off, Graham?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, wonderful session today. And yeah, I love finishing on that point. Yeah, space behind is always there. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.